Hello, everybody. My name is Keyonna Murray, and today I am going to be talking about gangs. And I know this might seem like a bit of a weird topic for this type of speech, but really what I'm going to be breaking down is whether or not youth should be held accountable in the same way as adults for the crimes that they consider when being members of a street gang. And this is a complex issue. That being said, generally speaking, minors under a certain age who commit crimes as part of a gang lifestyle should not be held accountable. A lot of people would disagree with this, but the gang lifestyle is something that is a result of many factors. It is a symptom of a larger issue, and as such, it is really important to be looking at the root causes as opposed to simply using tactics to try to get rid of the active behavior. So for the context, while our justice system is designed to protect minor defendants, it also could work against them, particularly if they are involved in youth crime. Most people that join gangs have been victimized in several ways as children, and it could manifest in a variety of adolescent behavior. This is not to say that street gangs are not problematic. They are very dangerous, not just for civilians, but also for the people who join them. That's why, though, when we are proposing solutions, it's important to think about what would actually be sustainable. Is going after a young adult that commits a crime and arresting them and throwing them into juvie, is that going to actually reverse the situation? It's really important that we look at strategies to mitigate this in general. Last semester, I completed an honors contract project on the experiences of young women in gangs. I read a book that had to do with this subject, and I also looked at the factors that led women to feel like they needed to join gangs. And one thing that I found as both a researcher and just a general person is that there are a lot of misconceptions out there. And when I see gangs now, I look at them very differently than I used to when I was young. Thinking outside the box does not have to mean downplaying common knowledge, but it does mean offering compassion and being willing to reconsider our biases. Gangs are fundamentally a way to cope with a lack of identity within mainstream culture. So those who take sociology might be familiar with the concept of the subcultural deviance theory, which is said to result from whole groups breaking off from society who have deviant values, subcultures, and deviance is a result of these individuals conforming to the values and norms of the subculture to which they belong. It also goes on to explain that the pull of peers is what primarily separates people from mainstream foundations. Without fixing the root issues that lead to increased crime, such as lack of structure and a stable support system, then it's really kind of unrealistic to sort of relate the problem to a person's moral character. If criminal activity is already a staple of lower income communities, it is extremely common in these areas. Then we really have to look at why that is, especially in individuals that are still growing and whose brains are still developing. Long-term programming often involves, again, compassionate thinking and less simplistic assumptions. So the second argument is that gangs are often structured, and being in one involves an impressive amount of maneuvering and logistics. It's not something where a group of people just come together and decide they're going to commit a crime. There are layers to them, and each layer has a specific function. So the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department classifies gang members into a few separate categories. And the primary ones are leadership, hardcore, associate, fringe, and wannabes. And all of these members have specific duties that they need to fulfill, with the exception of those who are at the bottom, such as wannabes. A lot of times, they are the ones who are attempting to become part of the gang. And unfortunately, sometimes those members are the most likely to commit dangerous crimes due to the fact that they want to be part of the fold and feel like they need to prove themselves. But all of these assignments that they do complete help protect the gang's domain. And these levels require a certain amount of dedication and organization. And these valuable skills, if they were developed in different contexts, that could be really good in terms of reducing the amount of crime and allowing these individuals to put those abilities to a very constructive use that might be able to help them build up their future. So if redirected, the energy and investment that youth put into gangs can help them mold a better life for themselves that is more in line with productive, or let me say constructive, and mainstream avenues. Gang violence also will mostly decrease with preventative action that addresses root causes. Preventative action allows professionals to target some of the issues that cause people to feel like they have no other choice but to join a gang. And so there are three ways that violence is typically addressed by law enforcement, and that's through prevention, intervention, and suppression tactics. Suppression is what would be, the typical image of arresting someone, taking them to trial, and then putting them in jail. It does prevent the ability to go and commit a crime in public. That being said, it doesn't necessarily take away some of the psychological factors. And so that's why, as a personal belief, suppression should really only be used when a person is irredeemable. And it's very hard to determine that. But one thing I can say is that when it comes to youth, it's almost impossible to truly make that sort of judgment. This goes along with key findings regarding the factors that decrease gang membership, at least prevention, such as strengthening families and schools, improving community supervision, training teachers and parents to properly manage disruptive youth, and teaching students interpersonal skills. These are all considered forms of early intervention. And the thing about early intervention is that it focuses on behaviors that are still developing. So that's why suppression is typically ineffective, because once somebody gets in the habit of committing crimes, unless there are certain things that are really addressed, then they already have been trained that that's a response to their circumstances. And so that's why in the early intervention stage, these individuals are being trained to sort of redirect their responses and to channel them into healthier alternatives. But it's harder to do this once they get to a certain age, because behavior is shaped by psychological development. It is solidified through each stage of growth. People forget that even kids that exhibit harmful behavior need guidance. Somehow, we seem to believe that once a child engages in a certain type of habit, it sort of mitigates their youth and the fact that they are not necessarily able to make adult decisions yet. So one of the most common counter arguments, especially to taking preventative action, is that it will require a significant amount of resources and taxpayer money, and that it's unfair to sort of place that responsibility on residents. But most people that live in these areas where crime is an issue want the government to bring more support to early intervention programs and later intervention programs as well, because they want to see the crime rates go down. It's really individuals outside of these communities that are complaining about this. And so it definitely shows a bit of a class divide there. Taxpayer money is also used to fund prisons, which, like I said, again, is a suppression tactic, so it's not really going to be as effective. And by dedicating a portion of what is placed into correctional facilities to prevention programs, residents are investing in the safety of their towns and their communities, as well as its future. The fact that the government does not adequately support grassroots programs, which is something that a lot of communities also create to try to solve the issue on their own, it's definitely a large part of why this system continues to self-perpetuate. So if money is prioritized over the lives of children, which is truly what is happening here, the problem is going to persist. We often talk about how child neglect in families is so harmful. That also applies to communal child neglect. At the end of the day, it's not the same thing, and obviously it doesn't provide the same level of interpersonal trauma that neglect in a household does. But if there are factors taking place or adverse childhood experiences that are leading someone to feel like they need to commit crime, then we as citizens are doing a disservice by not being willing to put some of our taxpayer money towards this. And then, of course, another kind of argument is that youth can still be held accountable, which to that, I would mostly just summarize it as their brains are still developing. That's an argument that was touched upon earlier. There are young people who grow up in hard circumstances and yes, choose not to commit crimes. But at the same time, it's really important to examine context. If a person is young and they're primarily committing crime as part of a group endeavor, then it's extremely likely that if some of the social influence of their peers was removed and replaced with something else, the behavior would change too. If somebody is committing crimes more independently and they tend to be extremely violent, then that might be something where there is a psychological factor at play. But even still, the immediate conclusion should not be that child is beyond saving. And so gang activity is ultimately symptomatic of a larger structural issue, and many of the solutions that get the most support fail to account for the problems that lay below the surface. And so in the future, if we want to improve our cities and, create a great environment for constructive urban development at every age, then we must challenge ourselves to go above and beyond and really looking beyond what's immediately in front of us and making sure that all solutions are child-centered as opposed to government-centered. Thank you.